In eastern India, there is a village. It's out in the middle of rice field after rice field after rice field. Families work in that village, manual labor in the rice fields all day for 40 cents a day. We went along with Dr. Paul Maxfield, who is the executive director of the Church of God Global Child Sponsorship Program. We went to do a site visit with him to the village of Rajpur, Kalahandi. We witnessed firsthand some of the most extreme poverty on planet Earth. Children of Promise works there in that forgotten village for two reasons. The people are underserved and underreached. They are some of the poorest of the poor, and there was no indigenous witness of the gospel of Jesus. And so Children of Promise went into work. They began to sponsor kids whose families would allow them to go to school instead of going to work in the rice fields. Children of Promise gathers those kids together. They check on the kids. They work with them. They feed them a really large, healthy, nutritious meal. And they share the stories of Jesus with these kids. While we were there, we were involved with personally interviewing every child in the program but one. We had his picture. We knew this 10-year-old boy's name was Bishu. And when Dr. Maxfield asked, "Where is Bishu?" it was obvious that some people were uneasy. Dr. Maxfield asked for Bishu's parents to come, and when they did, we were told that Bishu's family had incurred a large debt and that Bishu's father had sold his 10-year-old son to cover the family's debt. And that the man who now owned all of the rice fields that we could see in every direction, that this same man now owned this boy and was keeping him as a slave in his home. I walked away. I was beyond words. The mix of powerful emotions were at the same time disbelief and disgust and just raw anger. I could not, in the heat of the moment, discern what was coursing through me more. Was it heartbreak or rage or this nearly overwhelming desire to go to this man's house, deal with him personally, and then bring this boy back to his broken-hearted father and mother? Thankfully, Dr. Maxfield was there. In the midst of my own emotional response, Dr. Maxfield reached across the table and grabbed those parents' hands and started praying. And then he gathered the committee, the local leaders together, and they joined hands and they began to pray. Imagine that. They're facing an intractable situation, and what do? They pray. I was astonished by that. Later that night when Paul, Dr. Maxfield, was processing this with me, I remember the question was, "Steve, who else but the Lord can deliver that boy?" And so that day I saw them all talk together. The team there, the local team, the local leaders, they decided that they would attempt to negotiate together the payment and the release of this boy. Well, nothing like that, I assure you, happens quick, easy, safe, or cheap. They were putting themselves on the line. By the time that the negotiations were completed, our group had long been back home here in America. I had asked Dr. Maxfield if he would discreetly and quietly, whatever the price may be, would he let me know? And he did. And it was then that I was faced with one of the great ethical dilemmas of my life. If we get further involved, if the price is paid, are we empowering a larger problem? In essence, are we becoming part of the system? Are we rewarding the actions of this slave owner? I'll tell you, I went to Bible college, I have 2 seminary degrees and a PhD, yet nothing in my formal education could ever possibly prepare me for this real life experience. So I did what I saw the Christians in India do. So I did what I saw Paul Maxfield do. I began to pray on my knees again and again. I would go home. I would close the door to my home office. I would turn that office chair around, and I would get down on my knees, and I would pour it out before the Lord. And I did it again and again until I got to the place that finally my words ran out. And when my words ran out, my tears began. I would think of this boy and I would just weep. I'd never even met Bishu, but the thought of him kept my eyes wet and my knees bent. And the longer I stayed there, no longer talking but now listening, the questions became clear. We may not be able to change the whole world, but can we change this boy's world? Eventually, the most convicting question of all came to me. Steve, if this were your son, that boy that you carry his picture in your wallet, Steve, if that was Levi, what would you do? So you may disagree with me because I don't know that I did the right thing. I worked with an anonymous donor, and the money was sent, and payment was made, and Bishu was released, a prisoner set free. This is Bishu today, standing next to Dr. Paul Maxfield. Bishu is a freshman in high school today. And the last time the two of them were together, when this picture was taken this past year, Dr. Maxfield asked Bishu the question that he always does at the end of the Children of Promise interviews. And what's the best thing that has ever happened to you? And Dr. Maxfield wrote, Bishu looked me straight in the eye and he said, the day you rescued me. This week I've been writing back and forth with Paul. This is how Dr. Paul Maxfield closed his last final email to me. Steve, this is what can happen in the life of one child when there are those who care, love, advocate, and will put themselves on the line for them. I am so privileged to be a part of Bishu's story. And so should those from Church at the Crossing who helped make his freedom possible. Who knows where Bishu would be today if all of us working together in God's timing had not been where God wanted us to be on that day, all for the benefit of a young boy named Bishu.